This week we decided to do something different, and because of that, it turned out to be one of the most emotionally impactful sessions to date. Hi there, we play D&D at Morgan's Comics on Thursday nights where we're abiding by all COVID restrictions, limiting people at the table, social distancing, and wearing masks. So this week, the player who plays the druid was out of town and he wasn't able to come to session. So instead of continuing with combat minus one player, we decided to run a one-shot with the 3 remaining players. Before we got started, I told the players that this was canon, that we were retconning this one-shot into the story. And so any sort of actions that they took would have implications on the overall story when they all got back together. The session started with the ranger character opening her eyes and realizing that she's not in the dungeon anymore. She's actually in bed in a small cottage that looks very familiar to her. Turns out that she woke up inside of her childhood home, and when she goes to investigate, she finds a lot of the same things from her childhood, like a small bow, her wardrobe with all her outfits, and some noise coming from another room. She opens up the door and she finds her cousin from her childhood who's there just making a sandwich, and she immediately runs over and embraces her. The ranger doesn't really know what's going on, but she thinks to herself that maybe she's reliving her past in some way. She still has her current memories about what's happened in Orlane and in the dungeon, but for some reason, she's been transported back into her past. After hugging her cousin, the ranger is wondering what's going on, but she doesn't want to attract attention to herself, so she tries to play it like everything is normal. But every once in a while, she slips up on details, and her cousin is a little suspicious as to what's going on with her. The ranger learns that she has a job and she's late for work, and she also has a list of chores that her parents have given her. And the ranger, who hasn't seen her parents in years, starts to get really excited because for some reason they're here. She can go see them. So the ranger goes to her wardrobe and she sees a uniform that might be set for like a mail carrier or a UPS person. She dons it and then she starts heading out the front door. When she exits the house, she finds that she's not in Orlane or any village that she remembers. This place is completely new, and everything seems a little too good to be true. Birds are singing, the sun is shining, flowers are blooming, and everything seems to be happy. She looks over this quaint village and sees that it has all the markings of a place where people would want to live. It has a small tavern and a general store and a butcher and a leather shop and a city hall, and in between all of that, she sees this small flower stall that's next to a large fountain. And at the stall are both of her parents, getting ready to sell their goods. She rushes over and embraces them like she hasn't seen them in years. And when she does, they hug her back, but a little concerned with her enthusiasm. She tries to play it off like everything is fine, and they start talking to her about how her morning is going and if she picked up the list of chores that they gave her, and a little concerned that she's late for work. The elf ranger, after staring at her parents and trying to absorb everything she can, decides that she better go to her job, lest she be fired from it. And so she heads off into the woods towards the aviary. Even though everything seems perfect to her and she realizes that it probably isn't, she decides to embrace it because for the first time in a long time, she's happy again. When she gets to the aviary, she talks to her boss and finds out that she's actually in charge of taking care of a lot of the carrier pigeons and ravens that bring in the mail. And then she takes those boxes and letters and hand delivers it to everyone in the village. She collects 3 packages that she has to deliver that day. And as she does, she's looking out amongst the birds and she sees one blood red hawk that looks very familiar. And when she tries to find it in the flurry of all these wings and feathers, it disappears. And she tries to put it out of her mind and start heading out into the village to deliver these packages. We then move over to the rogue, who wakes up inside of the back room of a shop. And as he's looking around, he realizes he doesn't have any of his weapons or his thieves' tools or even his armor. And when he touches his face, he realizes that he's completely clean shaven. So he looks down on himself and he's wearing an apron. And on the other side of this shop, he hears the banging of metal on metal. And so he arises and he heads outside to go look and see where the ruckus is coming from. He sees this large man banging onto an anvil with a hammer and wearing these thick goggles. And when the man straightens up and looks back and he sees the rogue, he says something about early birds and worms, and he lifts up his goggles, revealing that he's actually the rogue's grandfather. The very same grandfather that the rogue killed back in Waterdeep and then ran away from his life to escape his past. The rogue just stands there, frozen in place, feeling as if he's quite literally seen a ghost. And as he does, something scurries over from on top of the table, reaches over and starts pushing onto his hand. And he looks down and he sees his animal companion Raffles, who's trying to get his attention. The rogue, who's in a daze, lets Raffles pull him over to the side of a counter. And as he does, he looks down and he sees all these other baby ferrets that Raffles is trying to pick up and show him. And they all look like Raffles' family before they got attacked by this snake. The grandfather, lifting up a towel and wiping the sweat off his brow, tells the rogue that he better get his chores done because at 2 o'clock they have a very special engagement that they have to go be part of. And when the rogue picks up his list of chores and he looks down on them, at 2 o'clock he sees that he has to bring flowers over to the cemetery to pay respects to his father, the anniversary of his death. And he also sees that his mother is going to be there. Now, the rogue has never seen his mother before. He only has a picture of her in a locket that he carries around his neck. And so he is going to have this moment in which he gets to interact and embrace her. And so he doesn't really know what to do because he realizes this isn't real. This entire thing is made up, and he can't come to terms with it being reality. But he wants desperately to see his mother. He stumbles out of the workshop getting ready to do his tasks, and as he does, he emerges into this small village, the same one that the rangers saw. It turns out that they're in the exact same place, even though they haven't seen each other yet. Finally, we move on to the tiefling warlock, who wakes up on a stone floor. He has aches in his neck and on his back, and as he arises, he realizes that it is really dark in this room. Which is very peculiar because tieflings have dark vision. He should be able to see in this room. And as he fumbles around, he gets over towards some light that's coming down from the rafters. And he looks down at his garb and he realizes that his skin isn't the right color. This warlock is supposed to have horns that are jettisoning out of his head and a large tail and very gray skin. And when he looks down at his skin, he realizes that it's a really pink hue. And he touches his head and he realizes that instead of horns, he has a full head of hair. As he's investigating himself, the cellar doors open up, letting in a stream of sunlight, and in walks down someone who is carrying a large bale of hay. They talk to the warlock and tell him that he better get to work because if the boss comes by and sees that he's sleeping on the job, he's gonna get fired. The warlock finds out that he's working on a farm and he has to go get his tools so that he can get back to work. And so he walks over towards the storeroom, starts collecting some tools, and he sees a letter on there for him that tells him a list of chores that he has to get done. And before the warlock leaves the storeroom, he looks over and he sees his reflection in a pane of glass on a window. And he sees that he has pink skin and blue eyes and yellow hair. And he says out loud, he's like, "Oh crap, I'm a white guy." The first thing the warlock tries to do is dip into that deep well of magic that he's been able to do almost all his life and go ahead and cast a cantrip. And as he does, as he reaches in, he feels nothing. He isn't able to use his magic. He rushes into town and reaches a courtyard where he sees all the same buildings that the other characters have seen, but he doesn't see them anywhere. Instead, this guard approaches him from the city watch and starts questioning him about what he was doing last night because the guard heard that there was a confrontation at the tavern. The warlock, trying to play it off as everything is okay, says that he's actually heading over to the tavern to see if everything's okay and if maybe he can help out with any damages that might have been caused. And as he does, for a split second, he sees that the city guard kind of looks like the constable from Orlane. And then, when the constable turns around, there's an arrow that's jettisoning out of his throat that is leaking blood. The warlock goes pale, even paler than he is right now, and he sees the city guard member tell him that he better behave himself, and then the guard member leaves. And the warlock is really confused at this point. The warlock enters the tavern and he sees that it looks almost exactly like the Golden Grain Inn from Orlane. And at the very end of the bar, he sees a bartender that's polishing some mugs and a person that's sitting at the bar that seems to be nursing a hangover. The warlock approaches and he sees that this person who's at the bar is actually holding a stake on top of his eye and just moaning out loud. The warlock approaches the man and he starts talking to him and realizes that his name is Gunter and he's actually one of the warlock's best childhood friends. But the warlock has no memory of this man. In talking with this man, he learns that last night they were actually in a scuffle with one of the village bullies of this area, and they actually got their asses handed to them. So as the warlock is getting filled in on what happened last night, the door of the tavern opens up and in comes the ranger, who's delivering a package to the shopkeeper. Now the ranger doesn't immediately recognize the warlock because he doesn't look like himself anymore. But when he approaches her and starts talking to her, she recognizes his voice and she just looks at him with wide eyes. And the warlock's like, "Don't look at me, I look ugly." Now the two party members are talking to each other and wondering what's going on, where are they, where is everyone else? And as they are, the tavern door opens up once more and this burly individual comes in, speaking out loud, "Oh McFly, thought I told you not to come here anymore." And in the door walks in Dorso, one of the individuals from the Ranger's past. This guy that's always been infatuated by her, but is kind of like this village bully. And in my mind, he looks like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Actually, before he moves over to them, he looks over across the bar and sees a mirror and starts admiring his reflection. The party members start approaching Dorso, and he asks the warlock if he liked the beatdown that he gave him last night. All the while, he's trying to hit on the ranger and try and persuade her to come back to his place later that evening. She is not into him at all, and so she lets him down in the best way that she can, and she starts to see if she can find the shopkeeper to deliver her package. The warlock holds his ground, and his buddy that was behind him approaches to his side, giving him some backup. Dorso, seeing that he's outnumbered, decides to leave the tavern, but tells them that they haven't seen the last of him. And as he leaves, another individual, the rogue, enters into the tavern because after what he's gone through, he needs a drink. The party members are now back together, and after the initial shock from the rogue seeing that the warlock is now a human, they decide that they need to try and get out of this village. The ranger asks them, "But what about the list of chores that we have to do?" And the warlock's like, "Screw the list, let's get out of here." And the ranger, who's wearing her mail carrier outfit, is kind of fumbling with her hands, and she's like, "But I want to do my chores." So they decide to go along with her, but they also hope that as they finish their tasks, something will become apparent to them in order to help them escape this village. So they work together on completing all of their tasks, and as they do, they start seeing small things that pop up that seem to be pushing through the veil of this reality. When they look at the bartender, he kind of looks like the same bartender from the Golden Grain Inn at Orlane, but now his skin is charred and smoking and he has flames coming from him. When they go to the butcher's and they see inside of her storeroom all these carcasses of pigs that are hanging from hooks, for a second they see villagers of Orlane that are being chained and hanged from the ceiling. At one point, the shopkeeper receives a letter from the ranger and he leaves it on the desk, and as he takes off, she reads the letter and she sees that it's written in blood and it says, "You need to get out." It becomes apparent to the players that this reality is starting to crumble in little parts every once in a while, and they're seeing behind the veil what reality is actually like. One of the last tasks that they have to do is go buy flowers for the rogue so he can bring them to the cemetery to pay respects to his father. They go to the flower stall and they meet the parents of the ranger, and she embraces them again because she feels like she may not get to see them again for a very long time. And as she does, she looks into the eyes of her mother, telling her she loves her. And when she does, she sees this cloudy look inside her mother's eyes, as if she, like so many of the other people inside of the dungeon, have been brainwashed. And the ranger weeps inside for her parents. As the rogue is buying flowers, the warlock is looking around this courtyard and he sees that there's actually a clock tower. But instead of 12 numbers on this clock tower, it only has 5. And the hour hand is slowly counting down to 1. He realizes to himself that countdowns cannot be good, so he tells the other party members that they have to get a leg up. As the party members approach the cemetery, they realize that it is larger than the village. It is acres and acres big, with tons of tombstones. And the ranger says out loud that it's probably the amount of souls that this evil from the dungeon has collected. Next to the rogue, his grandfather approaches him and tells him that it's time for them to go meet his mother. And they look over onto this small hill with a tree above it, and there's a silhouette of a woman waiting next to a grave. The other party members decide to give the rogue his alone time, and they decide to keep within distance, but let him be by himself and have this moment. The rogue, accompanied by his grandfather, go forward and meet his mother, and as he does, he sees that she is exactly how he remembers her from the picture. Sun is streaming through her hair, and she just looks brilliant and happy seeing him for the first time. Reaches out and puts his hand onto the face of his mother and can feel the warmth radiating from her cheek, and he just looks into her eyes and tells her that he wishes this was real, that he wishes she was real. But everything, all of this, is a fake memory orchestrated by Explicita Defilis, the evil in this dungeon. His mother turns away crying, and his grandfather, upset at him, tells him to respect his parents, and he pulls out this beating stick that he had on his belt. And instantly, the contempt and malice the rogue has felt towards his grandfather, the reason that he ended up killing him over in the city, all those emotions flood back into him. See, the story goes that his grandfather actually made his mother give the child up towards an orphanage because he ended up being a half-elf. He wasn't pure in his grandfather's mind. And ever since then, his mother tried to find the child, but she wasn't able to, and she ended up dying on the street one night looking for him. When the rogue learned about this, he was so infuriated that he ended up killing his grandfather and leaving the city, running away from his past. And now his past is right in front of him. As his grandfather lifts up the stick to hit him, he reaches up, grabs the stick, pulls it out of his hand, and he strikes down his grandfather. The other party members ready themselves to jump into this fight, but they realize that it's over before it even started. And they just let the rogue have this moment. As they avert their eyes, the ranger looks down at one of the tombstones and she sees her name starting to appear in the face of this tombstone. She starts to freak out and she's telling the warlock, and the warlock's like, "What can I do?" And he picks up his hammer that he has in his hand, and he wishes so much that it was the morning star that he's been used to his entire life. And as he does, the morning star appears in his hand for a second. The ranger sees this and she starts thinking to herself that maybe this is like a lucid dream. Maybe she can control what happens in this. So she tries to fly. And when she rolls, she doesn't roll well. So she jumps maybe about a foot in the air. The warlock picks up and readies his morning star, and he strikes down at this tombstone, chipping off a large top of it. And then the name of this ranger disappears. She reaches down and she picks up the piece of this tombstone, and they go to meet the rogue. As the team members get back together, they hear a ring of bells, and they look over at the clock tower and see that it has dropped down one more number. It's now at 2. With only one number left, they realize that they need to try and get out of there now. The party members think that maybe they have to get to the top of the clock tower. Maybe that's how they get out. And so they barge into the building, and they see maids and manservants that are just surprised by these intruders that are breaking in. And all of the help runs out of the building, trying to alert the city watch, trying to get police to come in and help them. The party members realize that their time is running out, so they make a mad dash up the stairs, trying to get to the top of this clock tower. The ranger passes this open door on her way up, and she looks inside and she sees that it's a room of Dorso, the Gaston-like figure that's really into her, and it has tons of portraits of himself and different kind of poses. And she sees over that there's an altar with a straw doll that looks exactly like her. And she's kind of creeped out by this, but she picks up the doll, and as she does, it moves its head and starts speaking to her. The straw doll speaks to her in her own voice, and it tells her that if she doesn't leave now, her soul is going to be trapped there, and this creature is going to have it. The ranger pleads for advice, trying to ask her how does she get out, and as she does, the straw doll just returns back to normal, freezing in place. The party members rush upwards, and they finally get to the last stairs that lead towards the attic, and as they burst through, they see that they're not inside of this clock tower anymore. They're suddenly inside of a large stone room that has a brazier right in the middle, and it has a door on the other side. The warlock, who can't see in the dark anymore, moves over to the brazier and lights it. And as the fire illuminates the room, they see the door that's in front of them looks just like the other doors, so many of them that they've passed inside of the dungeon. It's just moistened and swelled up with moisture, just barely holding the frame in place. They all look at each other and they start heading towards the door. And before they get any closer, a voice yells out, "Wait." Out from the shadows comes the rogue's mother, and she approaches him and asks him why he would want to leave her when they finally have found each other again. She tells the rogue that she's sorry that she left him in that orphanage all those years ago, and that if she could, she would take it all back. And at the same time, the two parents of the ranger step out from the shadows also. They approach the ranger and they tell her that they have been apart for so long, and they're finally back together. that their family is back together. And in the first time in this entire session, the two parents of the warlock also step out from the shadows. And they tell him that they're proud of him. And they wonder why he wouldn't want to just stay here with them. Why he wouldn't want to just stay and be normal, be accepted by everyone. The rogue speaks out and says that it isn't real as much as he'd want it to be. And his mother tells him that it can be as real as he'd like it to be. That in here, they can have a lifetime together. Regardless of what happens in the real world, they can be happy. The warlock's parents reach up and hold on to him, and they tell him that if he was just normal, if he was a human, he could have friends, he could have a family, he could be out in public, and he wouldn't have to feel ashamed. He could be normal. The warlock looks down at them with a solemn expression, and he tells them that at one time when he was younger, he wishes that he was normal. He wishes he was like everyone else. But he's grown. He's happy with who he is, and he has finally embraced who he is as an individual, every part of him. And as he finishes this speech, his skin returns to its normal shade of color. He feels the horns reappear on his head, and the tail from behind him appears again. And the familiar weight of the morning star next to his belt. His parents look up at him and they smile, and then they disappear into sand. The ranger goes next, and she tells them that even though she's been happy this time, that it isn't real. But when she returns to the real world, she'll try and find them, and she'll try and be together with them again. And as she does, she feels the familiar weight of the bow on the back of her back appear. She feels her armor reappear on herself, and she returns to her previous form. Her family looks at her, and they too disintegrate into sand. And finally, the rogue goes last. He tells his mother that he's grateful that he had this moment to spend with her, and even though he never had a family when he was younger, he feels as if he has a family now. He looks over at the other two party members and he smiles, saying that they are his new family, and he has to protect them. And he can't do that in here, even though he wishes he could. His mother also too smiles, and she disappears into sand. And as she does, the rogue feels his armor return to him. All his weapons and the familiar weights of all the different articles that he's collected return to his person. And now, the characters are alone in this room, and real tears begin to be shed at the table. The warlock, in an act of defiance, reaches his hand up and he shoots an eldritch blast into the ceiling. And as he does, his blast shoots up past the ceiling, past the facade of this image, and illuminates what's around them, kind of like a flare shooting up into the sky. He sees that the three of them are inside of what looks like the eye of a storm. And this storm that's swirling around them is made up of souls. All the souls that Explicita Defilis has collected. The flare slowly burns out, and he looks over at the door, and he enters into it, disappearing. The ranger looks over at the rogue, and he tells her that he'll be right behind her, and she enters in, disappearing as well. The rogue reaches over to the door, and before he goes in, he speaks out loud that Explicita Defilis has crossed a line at this point. She's made it personal, and he vows that he himself will kill her. And he enters into the door, disappearing. All the party members start to wake up, and they're now inside of the dungeon prison cell, the area that they saved all the people from Orlane. And they wake up from their long rest, and they look over at their other party member, the one that didn't show up, Induriel, who is actually asleep on the job when he's supposed to be keeping watch. Now, because of this experience, and because they were successful in making it out, they all have temporary hit points that they can now apply towards the battle that they are presently in. And the ranger also feels this rock, part of her tombstone, that's inside of her pocket, seemingly the only thing that they were able to bring back from the dreamlike state. And that's where we ended. Thanks for listening. I know it was a long one, and it was definitely something different, but we had a lot of fun. If you're interested in running your own D&D adventure, swing by Morgan's Comics, where they can help you get a lot of the different things that you need in order to have the same kind of experience. Come back next week and you'll learn what happens at the end of this battle that they were previously in. Everyone be safe out there. Bye now.